Hey, Ellie.
Hello, good morning.
Okay. Ellie, let folks know a little bit about you. And then I have a question about how the economy is affecting what you're seeing and about priorities and strategies right now. But like
Yeah,
first, let everyone know a little bit about you. You're in New York City?
I am in New York City, smack in the middle of Manhattan. Been here, I think, 12 years. I
Mm,
kind of tend to travel the US. I grew up in
right.
Texas, moved to California, and here I am. Yes, I've spent many, many years in marketing. That is where I grew up. I started my career at as a marketing analyst. I got very comfortable long time ago with looking at data back when we didn't have all these nice fancy tools. But
Mm-hmm.
yes, I've worn a lot of different hats, a lot of digital demand gen in my early career, which eventually brought me to a CMO role and some fractional opportunities.
All right. There's New York. I can hear it. Uh, okay. So, among the companies that you're working with and folks that you're talking to right now, the economy has kind of been up and down or all over the place for a while, right? But like moving into 2025, for instance, like how do you think it's affecting sort of marketing strategies and priorities these days?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have been waiting and kind of seeing what with the Fed, with the interest
Hmm.
rate, which just got cut, and then the elections. There's been this nervous tension and energy for the past year, with a lot of companies not wanting to take a risk or wanting to hold back. There's been a lot of hope that 2025 will change and we're going into a new ushered era, maybe getting closer to what we had in 2021, 2022 when things were booming. I think we're going to be a little bit in the middle of that. I do think there's some companies that by the end of the year, they're going to realize, oh, you know, bleep, we didn't set up, for the right strategy or the right team for 2025.
Right.
And by the time you get going is Q2, Q3. But there might be still some hesitancy for a while to getting into 2025. And, you're going to have a new president regardless. So I think there's a little bit of wait and see. So I do think still people are going to be a little risk averse, but hopefully that tends to loosen up a little bit more.
Okay. So you look at the numbers a lot. What sort of like just in 2025 alone, what do you think people can expect to see around AI and marketing?
Yeah, we've been using, I think AI was a big, huge hype 2023
Yeah.
to this year. I think in 2025, we'll start to see maybe AI take a different um, route for marketing and other. I do think in the actual AI, not Gen AI, I think we're going to see a lot of innovative approaches. I think a lot of companies are trying to incorporate AI into it, whether they actually do it or not. Or there's a lot of companies that have had some kind of AI in their platform or model, but now they're talking about it more, or they're trying to make themselves seem like they're more AI, new AI than they were. So I do think that will start to continue. With Gen AI, I think a lot of marketing folks have been doing a lot of testing, including myself.
Hmm.
I've been using all the Gen AI platforms and I heavily rely on them for certain things, but we do see the limitations in other things. So I do think it's still going to be continuous testing. There's some things we've adopted with Gen AI we're comfortable with, but there's still going to be this, what can it do more for us? How can it automate? How can it create more efficiency? But I don't know if it's going to be this blow up of what people are thinking. All of a sudden, we're going to start to reduce headcount because
Right.
now we have Gen AI.
So, what do you think people have adopted so far, and what do you think hasn't worked out or it's not suited for yet?
I think a lot of content work. I use it a lot myself for research, and I do the research because I know it can hallucinate, right? And
Hmm.
I try to run it across multiple Gen AI
Hmm.
platforms and do a little bit of my own research as well to see if it's telling the truth. But I use it a lot for research. I use it a lot for writing content, cleaning up my content, giving me a draft. I've tried creating images and logos with it. I think that's an area that it probably still needs to. It's not easy. You could
Right.
spend hours and hours trying
Yeah.
to create an image or tell it to put a copy of text on top of an image. I've tried to use it for data analytics, and for some things it's great. I give it benchmarks and I give it certain things, and it just, creates this what a model of what it could be. And I think that that's an area that if we could rely on it more without the risk of privacy or the fear,
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Me coming from demand gen background or digital, I can really see the value of how do we throw in all this data and have it be a support to us, not let it be a standalone, but a support and an augmentation.
That makes sense. Okay. Has uh, First of all, would you say that over the last 12 months or so, or do you think budgets have like expanded or tightened?
I think they've tightened.
Yeah.
Definitely
Um,
have tightened. I see that from speaking to companies. I see that from looking at salaries that are being listed for marketing
sure.
professionals and talking to my peers. So I think there is a tighten, and I think that it is a employer's market, but also a company's market in that we're going to hold certain things stable or less. Now, there are companies that are in growth stages, right?
Mhm.
And they demonstrated that they're doubling, tripling, and they can do that. So I can see a little bit of stuff. But I think on average, it probably have been some tightening.
And do you see any sort of change in tactics or like companies trying to focus on doing X instead of Y, given that they're operating inside like tighter budgets?
Sure.
Is
I
there
mean,
less like long-term branding maybe and more, direct response or digital, or is it the
yeah.
other way around, or is that not even a thing?
Yeah, I think brand has gotten a really bad rep in the
No.
last couple of years. I think when you talk about brand, and there's a lot of conversations and there's a lot of blogs being written about and brand is a money suck, right? And I do think that that is an education that needs to happen, especially as you're competing in a in a very saturated market. So there's a lot of players in the market where people tend to buy from a brand, right? I mean,
Right.
B2C has figured this out long time ago. B2B still fears that it's brand, you throw money at it, you don't know what it's doing. No, there are ways you can measure brand. It's not as easy as digital campaigns and demand gen and revenue generation, but brand should be brand to demand. You should be, your demand's going to fail, your lead gen's going to fail if you're not pumping up on your brand, you're not communicating your brand and your differentiators and value props. So I hope that more founders, venture capitalists, PE firm, whatever it may be, they start to come to that realization. I think a lot of big companies know that because they've been around and they've been stable and they've been investing in brand. But there's been a lot of this focus on revenue generation, but don't spend money on brand. That formula doesn't work.
I heard someone yesterday talking about they were talking about like I like conversations where people talk about really fundamental like stuff just to like check in, And someone asked like what is or how do you measure the ROI of marketing? And one of the people there said like here's why that question is wrong. So you look at the companies that have really dialed in their marketing, like they have very strong marketing, right? He said, what happens in a company where the marketing is very good is that the rest of the company gets to play capitalism on easy mode, right? Sales calls get answered and emails get opened and CEOs can call CEOs and get a call returned, right? He said they get the rest of the company gets to play on easy mode if marketing knows how to and then has the resources to and executes, right? Really, really well. And he said, that's the ROI of marketing. It saves everyone else time and money. I thought that was a pretty good answer.
That's absolutely right on. And
Yeah.
I, having worked at some big brands and companies before, even in a conversation when you're having a chat or at dinner and people say, "What do you do?" Right? If I mention this brand, you don't have to go any further than that. They go,
Right.
"Oh, okay." But if I mention a brand they've never heard of, there's another 5 to 10 minute
Yeah.
conversation about what we do, why we do it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just the basic of it.
You could you could be in any industry. You could make additives for paint. And if the like head of sales for Nike called you, even though you have nothing to do with shoes or clothes, you might say, "I'll take that call." That yeah, all right,
Oh, absolutely.
right.
Yeah,
That's how easy mode everything else gets to be if marketing is done really well. So,
absolutely.
has finding clients changed at all, or what clients are looking for changed at all this year?
Yeah, and I can speak to that because I'm one of those
Yeah,
CMOs or fractional CMOs that straddles both worlds. I
that's
haven't
why I
fully
asked you.
committed that I'm going to be fractional if an opportunity comes my
Hmm.
way and it's interesting. And I think that's another conversation. If you assess that you're a right fit, and I think that has to work from both ends, I take on that opportunity and project because I'm a lifetime learner. And if you look at my background, I've done a lot of different things in different sectors. So I don't shy away from that. Now I know the market is different. The market is like, no, you haven't done 12 years in this. I need absolutely the model you used in this company and bring it to this company and make sure it happens the same way. Again, it doesn't work that way. But so, and then I've also been exploring full-time opportunities to see, whatever makes sense for me. So I come from that question in that perspective that yes.
Right.
So I do think that clients, if I were to focus on fractional only, yeah, absolutely. I do think fractional has really blown up in the last couple of years, especially since 2023 because one we just talked about how companies are pulling back and they're
Hmm.
hedging the risk and they're tightening budget. They're not sure if they need a CMO, for example, right?
Right.
Or a full-time CMO, but they're not sure what they need. They need help, but they don't know what it is, and they want to get from one stage to another. So there's a lot of terms like fractional, interim, consultant.
Hmm.
You have to really assess to see what exactly that need is, but I do think it has exploded. Um, Future of it, I do think that there is an opportunity for fractional as companies assess what they need, and the tenure of the CMO, as we know, has shortened. So maybe it's better to, if you know you're going to have a short tenure, it's probably better to be a fractional, right? Versus a full time, and then in 18 months or 24 months and whatever that may be, you're looking for your next CMO, or you're as a CMO, you're looking for your next gig. So yes, I think there's probably a lot to unpack there. So I'm going to pause.
Yeah. Well, let's go from the other side then.
Yeah.
Not finding clients, but you talked earlier about uh, what's being offered for salaries and stuff for marketing
Hmm.
people. So it's a very different market if you're an
Yeah.
employer looking for marketing people than it was like 2, 3 years ago, right? Back when like nobody could get anybody. And so like if you were like advising companies or clients today for building out their team, like what are sort of the things they need to keep in mind and sort of like how to be successful at it.
Yeah, I think depends. One depends on the stage of the company.
Yeah.
I spoke with a company recently, very early stage, and they said, "Oh, we have a budget for a CMO at the end of the year." And I said, it was very early stage, and I said, "You don't need a CMO. That's not a time that you
Right.
need a CMO. You probably could use a fractional, build your product market fit, your messaging, your value
Mhm.
prop, right, and then bring out." I wrote a blog about what should be the first hire in a marketing, and I had some of my peers kind of debate with me, but I always say demand gen or marketing ops because you need a doer, you need somebody to execute on a lot of campaigns and do things, but you need the support of a fractional or interim or a consultant to guide you in that initial stage. Do I have the right product market fit? Do I
Mhm.
have the right value prop? Do I have the messaging? That is not a everyday doer, right? You kind of, and so you need that person to guide the demand gen or the marketing ops, whatever that first hire is. And I think that there's an opportunity in very early stage startup to get a CMO that can do that big strategy, go to market, your
Mhm.
positioning, and then hire in a more mid-level to junior level person that can do on execute on tactics on a daily basis.
I would imagine that any company that puts up any position for anywhere in marketing must get flooded within like a day or two these days.
Absolutely.
I
There's
don't know. I've never been in that situation, so I don't know how you even like pick the top 25.
It's tough. It is really tough, and I can from the applicants because there's the market is flooded with talent, not just people
Yes.
that are looking without a job, but also people who are unhappy and want to leave because of how the market's been and how the companies that may have been treating the budgets in the past year and a half. So there's a lot of interest to move and shift and leave. And I think for the companies, it's also challenging because you're flooded. So this is where, the motto for this past year and a half has been, look to your network, 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 network. Don't apply blindly. And I think from the company's perspective is they're looking for somebody they trust to say, look at this person, right? Talk to this person. I've worked with them before, or I know their reputation. So I think it works both ways. That again, it goes about to go branding, right? Your brand and your reputation speaks to your abilities and your what you can offer a company.
I talked to a CMO a few months ago, and I asked, and what you just talked about, and like, do you know someone refers? I asked, like these days, and we were talking about like it's 2024, crazy year, and I said 2024 means that we're halfway through the third decade of the 21st century, right? Because 0 to 10 is the first decade, 10 to 20 is the second decade, 20 to 30 is the third decade. I said, halfway through the third decade of, or really a quarter of the way through the entire century, how do companies find agencies these days? And he says, in my case, he's been a CMO like 9 times at different companies throughout his long career. And he said, it's no different today than it was. And I know this because I know he knows it because he's known a lot of CMOs. He said, we all do the same thing. We ask around.
Yeah.
I said, how is that different than how an agency would have been found like 100 years ago? He says, not different at all. It's just
That's true.
nothing's changed.
That's true. I mean, but I do think that network has gotten bigger.
Yeah.
There's so many of these Slack channels and that have popped up that, very niche group of people
Mm-hmm.
are on there. So, but most of us are probably on multiple and we're overwhelmed, right? But you might share the same message in 5 different ones. Hey, I'm looking for an agency that does this, and you'll get a lot of different options and that people suggest. You hope to see a pattern, right? That's your goal. You hope to say, oh, two or three people have recommended the same agency and that's the one to go with. But it's not that easy, because at the end of the day, you'll get maybe 10 referrals and you got to go through the same process and you're still vetting them out for what you need from them and looking at their portfolio and then so on. I do think that the agency model has also blown up in the last year, because when you talk about that fractional, there's a lot of fractional that have gone and created an agency. And so you have a lot more options out there, but it's also a lot more difficult to vet, because there's so many. How do you choose? So eventually you go back to experience. Who's been doing it the longest? Who gets the most recommendations, right? Who's bigger? Can I afford them?
Yeah. So here's a scenario. One of your good friends comes to you and says, hey, Ellie, my kid graduated from college and just started. They're gonna want to work in marketing, start a career in marketing. They just got hired for their first ever like full-time job. They're the newest, most junior person on a relatively big marketing team. You're at the other end of that totem at this point. What advice do you have for my kid? If you were starting out today and you figured you're going to spend your career in marketing, like how should you be thinking?
Yeah. Never stop learning. Never put yourself in a box, right? Don't, especially at that level, don't say no, or I can't do this. Figure it out, right? There's so many opportunities out there to go learn, even if something you don't know. Find people that can teach you. So my one advice would be to learn as much as you can, anything that you can, and don't say no.
Do you think, or do you see, I mean, you're talking to a lot of companies. Do you see any like common mistakes where you keep saying like, why does everyone keep doing this? This doesn't work anymore, or this isn't going to work for a while yet. Are companies, or why are they, why are they budgeting that much or not enough? Like, what kind of mistakes are companies making with their marketing strategies right now?
That's a hard one. Because it depends. I mean, I think that one of the common themes have been, we spend a lot of money on big events, right? They're a big ticket item. Do we need to go to all of these events and pay so much? Why don't you optimize it in your digital, which costs you a lot less? But I do think there is a place for events. You just have to be a lot more strategic about how you show up and what you do. Um, you can't go to every event. There's few big brands that can go to every event and just have this huge booth and the experience. So, I think that scenario that we saw a lot of shift toward smaller, intimate events, but higher caliber, and bring in more senior people, because you don't find those senior people going to some of these big events and
Right.
walking around the showroom, for example. And I do think that there's still room for that, but they're maybe a little bit more cost effective than the big presents, but they're still expensive. So I do think that experience is probably more of what we've been kind of seeing a shift toward, and I think that will continue. At it with your optimization of digital channels and looking for new ways to get in front of your audience, tightening that audience, right? But I think it also goes back to data. You should try a lot of these things. You should,
Mm-hmm.
because you need to know for your brand, your ICP, ideal customer, your persona, how your product, what is creating that demand, what is creating that win rate at the end. It's not the same for every organization, so you need to figure out the formula for yourself. And I think right now there may be a lot of out of the box, we're going to do percentage here, this and this. That's okay if you don't know, if you don't have enough data to understand, but make sure you're getting to a point that you're looking at that customer journey to understand what works for you and optimize your budget toward that.
Do you think that like so many people being remote now has changed how marketing teams work?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I grew up in the old school days of everybody went to the office, and
Right.
you were in the central location. And I do think there's some advantages to that. So I personally like the hybrid model, or at least an opportunity to get together with your team once, a quarter or something, to have, because that in-person meeting and brainstorming and just building that relationship, I think is still very valuable. But the model changed when we all went remote, and I managed a lot of very diverse global teams all across the world,
Mm-hmm.
which even in the old model wouldn't be feasible to bring them together very regularly.
Right.
So making sure as a leader that you're there for them and you have that presence and you're available to them, but also making sure they feel included. So one of the fun things I always like to do with every team I manage, or every new company that I go into, especially if I have a big, huge global team, is at every one of our monthly meetings, somebody, you are free to come in with your presentation about you, Dean. And people got creative. I had one guy who created this very funny video about his life and who he is. I had people bring in, their, slides to talk about
Right.
themselves and what their passions are. That is a connection you make with your team, because now I know you, and I can ask about that passion or that trip you went on as when I meet with you. So I
Right.
think those things are very important when you have these remote global teams. People still want to feel connected.
Um, that brings me to a question around short form video and user generated content. Right. Um, Remind me, do you work mostly with B2C or B2B companies? It's been
Mostly,
shifting a little bit,
mostly
right?
B2B, mostly B2B.
Right. And so short form video and especially UGC, right, user generated content, not like super deeply penetrated into B2B. Most of my work's in B2B as well.
Yeah.
Right? In fact, I'm writing just this week, I'm writing a script for a promo video for like a big enterprise software company. And the constant challenge is they want to stuff as many words and long, complicated technical phrasing into this 60-second video as they can. And I keep stopping them. And I say, different types of media have different constraints, and people aren't reading this. So, no, right? But do you see sort of like the rise, and on the flip side of that, right? I do some B2C, but not a ton. But the podcast itself averages right now about 10,000 views a week just on TikTok. You know, which I would not have thought as a B2B platform, and yet there it is.
Yeah.
Do you think that that sort of rise of short form video and even user generated content is going to penetrate into B2B? And if so, like any thoughts or ideas on how?
It's been trying to for some
Yeah.
time. Like we became a huge fan of video content many years ago, and a lot of B2B companies started to create videos. I think the challenge with B2B is, one, to your point, there's a lot of technical stuff that you have to explain for the user to understand. And your
Yeah.
user, like if I were to talk about my phone on TikTok, everybody has a phone and they understand. But I have to get very granular to finding who would buy my software on TikTok to have that conversation with. So it's not just that you can create it or have a user generate it and throw it out there and they will come, right?
Right.
So there's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of that. How do you explain the complex offering that we have in a TikTok? People will find it interesting. Um, the other part, the other reason that I don't think it has, especially with user generated, is because of the risk. B2B
Mhm.
companies are more risk averse, right? If
Yeah.
I have you talk about my product and you don't say something completely positive,
Right.
how do I hedge against that? I worked at a lot of professional services that, but our clients were people that were facing a risk, right?
Hmm.
Try creating a customer reference or case study when having a customer talk about how they messed up
Yeah.
and how you got to go in and fix it. They don't want to talk about that.
No.
So you're not going to get user generated content. And
And
I
then,
also go ahead.
well, there's a flip side of that. For two of the companies that I worked for back in corporate, they were all enterprise software companies. The entire universe of potential customers for them was under 500 companies worldwide.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that means that unlike, someone who makes toothpaste, they can't run they can't test a campaign in Tulsa and no one outside of Tulsa is ever going to see those ads or commercials, right? So the risk of turning off, if they turned off 5 companies, that's 1% of their entire market just vaporized. Potential market is gone and might never come back. And so, yeah, on the one hand, they have to, you have to experiment. If you're not experimenting in marketing, then like I forget who says it, but the saying is, in marketing there's no safety in numbers, right?
Yeah.
If you're just like everyone else, that's not safe. Or the other way I heard a phrase once is, of all the places to be, there's no more dangerous place when you're crossing the road than the middle of the road. At
Absolutely.
least on the side, you're less likely, traffic's only coming from, but if you're in the middle, all of the dangerous stuff's coming at you and there's nowhere to go. So it's never safe to be in the middle of the road in marketing.
And there's no growth and innovation unless you're
Right.
testing new things, and some of those times you fail, right?
And yet your universe is like very small usually, or very,
Yeah.
I was, the
Having
way I
you
explain it when I'm writing for these folks is I say, look, it's very similar to when you have a booth at a conference or you're running a webinar or you're doing a video. I said, the likelihood that like the top decision maker is walking around that conference or on your webinar, or like, it's very, very small. You're way better off just focusing on trying to create one particular moment in someone's head. And that moment is, my boss is going to want to talk to these guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything that doesn't drive you to that point, you're either saying stuff because you want to say it or because you think your boss would want you to say it, but you're not thinking about that moment. You're never talking to the ultimate decision maker in B2B. By definition, at least 2 people or groups or legal or procurement or a steering committee, somebody has to sign off on everything, right?
Absolutely.
But you're just trying to create the moment. My boss is going to want to talk to these guys. That's it.
Absolutely. And that's the other, yeah, I think we talk about risk with
Mhm.
B2B is a
Yeah.
buying community, a committee, right? And one person can create a user generated content without getting all those approvals
Yeah.
most of the time. I'm
Yeah.
still a huge fan of it. I do think there's a lot of testing and learning to be done and
Yep.
learning from B2C, but B2B still has, they have a long road ahead of them.
Yeah. That's why B2B is more fun, right? Creatively, it's more fun because you have more constraints. All creativity comes from constraints. You're supposed to build a rocket, but with bicycle parts in a garage. That's the way it works. Okay. We're we're winding down. I have one question, just in case you happen to know of anything or have an answer for it, and then we'll talk about the last part, which is: do you think there's like any sort of underrated marketing strategy or tactic or platform or communication channel? Is there anything sort of underrated right now that the companies you're talking to, you think they should be paying more attention to or taking a shot with, but they're not doing it?
Yeah, I think one of those channels, especially in a B2B, that has been untested. We focus very much on social media and LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the one place to go. There
Mhm.
probably are a lot of opportunities on other social media channels, but people just don't explore them
Right.
because it's hard to get in front of the right customers. I think, the social media companies also need to do a better job of making that value prop um, for B2B, but influencer marketing for B2B, there's an opportunity there, and they're on a lot of social media. Again, when we're talking about peers, right? We ask our peers.
Yeah.
That's the place to ask. So I do think that might be one of the channels that historically we've underutilized in B2B because we look at it as very much B2C. So there might be that opportunity. Uh,
Wait, wait. What do you mean by that? You mean like word of mouth or something different?
It's word of mouth. It's how do you tap into other social media channels to get in front of your audience with the right messaging and that
Sure.
user generated content and the videos, right? We don't. Like, there's a lot of companies that don't have other social media channels except LinkedIn, and that's where they put a lot of their dollars in. So I
Right.
do think there might be some opportunities to expand and put up some really creative stuff out there that you eventually get in front of the right customer, especially if you're willing to be um, maybe test the boundaries a little bit. I think you can get creative when you're talking about video. You combine your video, user-generated content, pure content, and then social media. I think there are a lot of opportunities
Sure.
that we still have to learn from, and I think it's an area that there will be more channels like the Instagrams and the TikToks and so
Hmm.
on. And B2B has to find a way to tap into that a little bit more.
Okay. Well, I love this discussion. This has been great. Thanks for being here. Who should be contacting you these days, and what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, my LinkedIn is the best way to get in touch
Okay.
with me. I help, companies when they're trying to figure out, what kind of marketing help do they need,
Mhm.
right? How do they get from this stage they're into the next? And I can guide them in that, how to build their teams, what are the martech stack that they need, what are some of the campaigns they should be thinking about, what should spend their money. But those are some of the consulting or the fractional help that I can provide companies with their go-to-market strategies.
Right.
But also, like I said, I'm kind of straddling both worlds. I'm also looking for that full-time opportunity of leading marketing teams. I'm very strong in brand and demand.
Mhm.
So those are the kind of the roles in digital. Those are the kind of roles and opportunities I lean into, whether I'm
Right on.
consulting for a company or whether I'm as part of the bigger team.
All right. Well, this has been excellent and so much fun talking to you
Thank
today.
you. This
Thanks
has
for
been,
being here.
yeah, this has been fun.
All right. Thank you, Ellie. Thanks, folks, for watching. And if the analytics tell me anything, there's a greater than 99% chance if you see me saying goodbye, it's in a clip. So hello and goodbye. And there's a lot of clips. So keep an eye out. We're all over the place now. Thanks, Ellie.